My name is Serena Vale. For 32 years, I believed that love was something that had to be earned. That night, sitting alone in a corner of one of Manhattan's most expensive restaurants, with a folded bill inside a black leather folder in front of me, I finally understood. They had never loved me. They had used me. But let me start from the beginning. The table. Restaurant Aurelius was the kind of place where the background music costs more than my rent. Crystal chandeliers poured golden light over imported wine glasses. Waiters moved in silence, like well-dressed ghosts. I was the one who made the reservation. I was the one who selected the menu. I was the one who called to confirm the seats the week before. It was Richard's 60th birthday, the man who signed my adoption papers when I was 4 years old, the man who never once called me his daughter unless someone important was within earshot. The table seated 12. The whole family was there. Richard and Carol, my adoptive parents, Daniel, the oldest biological son, who treated every dinner like a board meeting, Isabel, the middle daughter, who grew up believing the world owed her constant attention, and a rotation of cousins, in-laws, and spouses, all carrying the same last name like a coat of arms. And me, Serena Vale, the different last name, the one who came later. I sat between Isabel and Daniel's wife. I ordered sparkling water. I tried to join a conversation about a trip the couple had taken to Portugal. Isabel cut me off at the third word to say something about the rosé. Nobody looked at me. I had learned not to notice, or rather, I had learned to pretend I didn't. 32 years of practice. Dinner moved forward. Appetizers were brought. Wines were opened with ceremony. Daniel gave a long toast about legacy and family values, staring directly at Richard the entire time, never once at me. Carol cried with emotion. Isabel applauded with just her fingertips, like someone at the theater. I smiled. I always smiled. It was when the second course arrived that Isabel leaned toward me, slowly, with that calculated way she had, like someone handing you a knife while grinning. "Serena." Her voice was low, almost intimate, almost kind. "Would you mind sitting at that little table over there?" She gestured with her chin toward a small table near the bar, isolated, dim, beneath a weak light fixture. "It's just that tonight is a very special evening for the family. You understand? For the real family." The silence that followed lasted maybe 2 seconds. 2 seconds in which I heard the clink of glasses, a quiet laugh from the other end of the table, and the sound of my own heart dropping to the floor. Nobody protested. Richard looked at his plate. Carol took a sip of wine. Daniel kept talking to his cousin as if nothing had been said. I stood up. I picked up my purse. I pushed my chair carefully back under the table, as if that small act of civility still mattered. I walked the 30 feet to the little table near the bar with my head up, feeling every pair of eyes in the room follow me. Some curious, some uncomfortable, most indifferent. I sat down alone, folded the napkin in my lap, and ordered a glass of water. I stayed there for nearly 2 hours. Fragments drifted over from the main table, Daniel's laughter, Isabel commenting on dessert, Richard accepting congratulations like someone collecting trophies. When the waiter approached for the second time with that look of professional discomfort, I already knew what was coming. The black leather folder was placed at my table with an almost inaudible, "Here you are." I opened it slowly. $3,270. 12 people, 3 hours of dinner, $400 bottles of wine, a custom dessert ordered in advance for the birthday guest. All for me. I felt my hand tremble as I pulled the card from my wallet. Across the room, Isabel said something and the whole table laughed at the same time. I signed the receipt. The pen left an uneven line on the paper, the only proof that my hand wasn't steady. I closed the folder, thanked the waiter with a smile that cost me every muscle in my face, and walked out. I stopped on the cold Manhattan sidewalk, cars rushing past, the city loud and indifferent as always, and realized that something inside me had broken in a way that would never go back to what it was before. Not from sadness, from clarity. What came before? You need to understand something about growing up as the different one in a family like that. It isn't a single moment, it isn't one dramatic scene, it's a quiet accumulation of 1,000 small exclusions, so subtle that you spend years thinking you're too sensitive, that you're exaggerating, that you should be more grateful. When Daniel turned 15, they threw a party for 120 people at a country club. I turned 15 on a Wednesday. Carol bought a grocery store cake, and we sang Happy Birthday before dinner. She said I should pick a restaurant to celebrate that weekend. The weekend never came. When Isabel got into law school, Richard announced at the table that he'd be covering her apartment near campus, her tuition, her books, a gift for her hard work. When I got accepted to the journalism program at NYU, Carol said I should be grateful for having had a good upbringing until now. I worked 2 jobs by my junior year. I never asked for anything. I learned not to ask. There was one person, though, Aunt Dorothy, Richard's great-aunt, 82 years old, with completely white hair and eyes that seemed to record everything. She watched me during Sunday lunches with an attention no one else ever gave me. Once, when I was around 18, she caught me alone in the kitchen and said, without preamble, "They don't deserve you, but one day the world will know exactly who you are." I laughed, embarrassed. I thought it was just something a sentimental old woman would say. It wasn't. The envelope. 3 weeks after the dinner, my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. It was a lawyer. His name was Mr. Caldwell, and he spoke in that calm, almost bored tone of someone who has made this call many times before. "Miss Serena Vale, you have been listed as the primary beneficiary in the estate of Dorothy Alcott, who passed away yesterday. Would you be available to come to the office on Thursday?" I held the phone so tightly my palm turned red. Dorothy was gone, and she had left me something. Mr. Caldwell's office was in an old building in Midtown, with marble floors and that smell of paper and gravity that important places tend to have. I arrived 10 minutes early. Daniel and Isabel arrived 5 minutes later, together, without acknowledging me. Mr. Caldwell opened the folder. He read aloud in that notary voice, slow and precise, and in the silence of that office, while Daniel straightened his tie and Isabel checked her phone, their world began to collapse word by word. Dorothy had left me. Her Upper West Side apartment, valued at $2.1 million, 3 commercial properties she'd been leasing in Midtown, a minority stake in a logistics company that paid quarterly dividends, and a letter addressed only to me, written by hand, which I only read later alone with trembling hands. "Serena, I always saw, from the very first Sunday you appeared in that house at 4 years old, looking at everything like someone learning the world from scratch, and nobody picked you up. You deserved more than what they gave you. Now you have what you need to build whatever you want. Don't build resentment. Build something larger than anything they ever imagined. With love, Dorothy." I sat with that letter in my lap for a full hour before I could move. The chaos. If you think the family reacted with dignity, you've never met people who lose money they thought was already theirs. Daniel called me at 11 at night. His voice wasn't that of a businessman, it was the voice of a furious child wearing an adult disguise. "You did something to her. That woman was senile. We're contesting this." Isabel was more sophisticated. She gave an interview to a lifestyle podcast with 3 million subscribers, crying in that photogenic way she had, insisting that she had been like a granddaughter to Dorothy and that certain people knew how to take advantage of a lonely, vulnerable elderly woman. She didn't say my name. She didn't need to. The podcast went viral in 18 hours. My Instagram, which had around 4,000 followers, was flooded with comments. Some defended me. Most called me things I'd rather not repeat. Richard sent me a text message, the first direct message he'd sent me in years. "You hope you're satisfied." That was all. I reread that sentence maybe 12 times, trying to find some nuance, some opening, anything that was human. There was nothing. What Dorothy knew. It was Mr. Caldwell who told me, in a closing meeting for the estate, in that calm voice of someone who keeps professional secrets. Dorothy hadn't changed her will on impulse or out of sentimental attachment. She'd hired a private firm 2 years earlier, a quiet audit, public records, documents that anyone could have accessed, but that nobody had bothered to look for. When my biological parents died in a car accident, I was 3 years and 8 months. They left a life insurance policy and a savings account, both legally designated for my care and education, an amount that, with interest, would be worth nearly $700,000 today. Richard and Carol had legal access to those funds as my guardians. The renovation of their Connecticut house was paid with that money. Daniel's private school tuition, the 2 family trips to Europe when I was 8 and 11, trips I didn't go on because, as Carol explained at the time, it would be too exhausting for such a little one. I was 8 years old. I wasn't little. I simply wasn't part of the plan. I looked at the bank statements Mr. Caldwell slid across the table and felt something strange. Not rage, not immediately. It was that feeling of hearing an old song and suddenly understanding the lyrics you'd always sung wrong. Everything made sense in a way that hurt in a completely new way. I hadn't been hard to love. I had been robbed. The decision. I could have stayed quiet. That's the option most people take. Take what you've been given, sign the papers, thank everyone in silence, and disappear. Don't cause problems, don't be difficult, don't be ungrateful. I had spent my entire life choosing that option. This time, I didn't. I hired my own attorney, Miss Patricia Wells, a woman in her early 50s with a sharp bob and the kind of calm that comes from having won cases that looked impossible. She listened to everything, reviewed the documents, and said simply, "They committed fraud. Do you just want the money back, or do you want this to be public?" I thought of Dorothy writing that letter by hand. I thought of the waiter placing the black folder at my small table near the bar. I thought of being 8 years old, left behind while the family traveled. "I want it to be public," I said. The hearing. The Manhattan Civil Courthouse has long corridors and that fluorescent lighting that makes everyone look slightly unwell. I arrived early. Miss Wells arrived 2 minutes later, thick folder under her arm. Across the hall, Daniel was whispering to their attorney. Isabel looked at me once, just once, and quickly looked away. It was the first time in weeks I'd seen her in person. She looked smaller than I remembered. Their lawyer spoke first. He was good at what he did, built a clean narrative about an opportunistic young woman who had taken advantage of a sympathetic elderly woman, planting doubt about my character, suggesting that my ingratitude for the love this family had given me was itself evidence of something twisted in me. I listened to every word without moving. Then Miss Wells stood up. She never raised her voice. She didn't need to. She placed the bank statements on the table, the records from my biological parents' life insurance, the timeline, funds received, funds withdrawn, destinations. Everything documented, everything traceable. Then she called the first witness. It was my 4th grade teacher who had given me a school supply list at the start of the year and watched me return with half the items for 3 months running, who had called home and been told by Carol that children need to learn to appreciate what they have. The second witness was a former neighbor who overheard on a Sunday afternoon in 2004 Richard telling another man, loudly, not realizing I was on the other side of the fence, "The little one was Carol's decision. I was never really on board." I was 7 years old when those words were spoken. I heard them in that courtroom at 39. I didn't cry, not in that moment. The moment I cried was when Miss Wells asked to play an audio recording. It was a WhatsApp message Isabel had sent to a friend 3 days after the podcast launched. She hadn't known the friend had saved it. The friend had saved it. She was always a burden, wasn't she? Mom felt sorry for her, but none of us asked for that. Now the old woman goes and leaves it all to her? The nerve! We're the ones who raised her, who gave her a roof, food, clothes, and she gets everything? No, this isn't over. The silence that followed was the kind that physically hurts. The judge, Honorable Margaret Reeves, looked at Isabel for a long moment before turning back to the documents. I stood when Miss Wells indicated. There was no prepared speech, there was only the truth, which for years I had folded and tucked into small spaces so it would fit inside the life they'd left me with. "I'm not here to destroy anyone," I said, and my voice came out steadier than I expected. "I'm here because for 32 years I believed the problem was me, that I wasn't daughter enough, that I hadn't tried hard enough, that I should be more grateful for the roof I was given, a roof that, as we now know, was partially paid for by the money my biological parents left before they died." I stopped, breathed. "I don't want the past back. That's impossible. I only want it on public record that this happened, so that no adopted child ever has to spend their whole life wondering why they're never enough." Judge Margaret Reeves brought down her gavel 4 hours later. Will upheld, estate confirmed, Richard and Carol ordered to repay all misappropriated funds. With compound interest, the total came to $1.3 million. Daniel left without looking at me. Isabel left crying, but it wasn't the photogenic cry from the podcast. It was the cry of someone realizing they've lost something they never should have had. Richard stayed seated for a moment after everyone had gone. He looked at me once, said nothing, stood up and walked out. I never found out if he wanted to say something. I decided I didn't need to know. After. Dorothy was right. I didn't build resentment. I turned her Upper West Side apartment into the headquarters of a nonprofit I founded with a child psychologist I met at an adoption advocacy event, the Rooted Foundation, focused on providing emotional and legal support to adopted children in vulnerable family situations. In 2 years, we served over 400 families. The feature People magazine ran in the foundation included a photo of me in front of the building, smiling. It wasn't the smile I wore at Sunday dinners. It was a different one I didn't know I had. Isabel sent me a message 6 months after the verdict, 2 lines of apology, and in the 3 lines that followed, a request for a loan. I deleted it without responding. Some doors, when they close, should stay closed. Sometimes, when the foundation has a hard day and I'm exhausted, I open my desk drawer and take out Dorothy's letter. Build something larger than anything they ever imagined. And then I look out the window at the city that didn't stop for me when I needed it to, and I think that maybe that's exactly it. Life doesn't stop, but at any moment you can choose to stop walking at the rhythm other people set for you. That night at the restaurant, the $3,270 bill I signed with trembling hands, I paid every cent, and I don't regret it, because it was the price I paid to finally understand who I was and who I refused to keep being. Serena Vale, New York, 2024. Tell me, where did my story end up? I'd love to know.